I would like to introduce Clayton Borah. Clayton was born and raised in Nampa, Idaho. He lives here with his wife, Bridget. He attended Northwest Nazarene University, where he got his degree in graphic design and went on to get his master's in media design from Full Sail University out of Florida. Clayton has his own strategy and design boutique where he helps people to understand branding and tell their branding story, and also to solve communication problems. So I'd like to introduce Clayton Borah.
This is a small group. So hopefully this will be kind of interactive, and if you have any questions at the end, I'd like to at least let you have a chance to ask those. So first I'm sort of asking you a question though. What is branding, or how would you define a brand?
I would say that it's a compilation of the... It's really sad that I can't think of something on the spot because that's my area as well, but I would say it's a compilation of the things that people think about your business.
Okay.
The first thing that popped into my head was a label.
A label? Okay. Anyone else have any ideas?
Name recognition, like Nike, Reebok, stuff like that.
Okay. There's a lot of different definitions of branding. I actually don't like the word brand because it has so many different connotations. And we'll get to kind of how I like to phrase these discussions. But for the most part, it's kind of what Kaylee says, that your brand is not what you think it is, it's what everyone else thinks it is. So if you think that you offer the best products or services in the valley and your customers don't think so, it really doesn't matter what you think. So that means ultimately you don't have any control over your brand, just like you don't have any control over what people think about you. So I have a little bit of a soapbox here, where because you don't actually have control over your brand, anyone that says that they can develop a brand for you, or they can manage your brand, or they're a branding guru, or any of these sorts of things, they're full of it. And they're just like you don't have control over your brand, they can't control what other people think of your business either. So if you decide you want to hire someone to help you, just be wary of what they're saying and make sure you have a good contract. So one of the things that people think a brand is the mark itself, the logo. They think of brand, they think of Nike or whatever, and they think of that mark itself, but a brand is so much more than a logo. The logo is a valuable piece of the brand identity, but it's not a brand in itself. So we'll go back a little bit and give a little bit of short history of where brands come from, so we can kind of have a little bit of context about the way that we think about them today. So we've been... I'm too tall. I need a podium. I'm going to hold this up here. Sorry.
We were going to bring one. Forgot it.
We've been marking ourselves for centuries. We started drawing pictures on cave walls to tell stories about ourselves, and I'll get back to this idea of story later. We mark our things. We have possessions, and we want others to know that they belong to us, like ranchers brand cattle. This concept of making distinction through marks is part of our history. So that's where the logo is definitely part of your brand, but it's not the brand itself. So before the Industrial Revolution and our development of the technology to mass produce items, we bought and sold items from local stores, producers. There was usually just one brand of everything. If you wanted to buy beans, you went and you bought beans. If you needed a blacksmith, you went to the blacksmith. There wasn't a whole lot of competition. But once we developed the technology to mass produce items, and we had the railroad system to transport them all over, we began to see the first logos and marks showing up on products. And over time, our grocery stores and shopping centers have become saturated with similar products, all vying for our attention and our dollars. Soon, businesses realize that they have to differentiate themselves because everyone is selling the same thing. So we have the introduction of luxury brands, things like BMW and Rolex. These brands are high quality, high price, but also offered an allure of status. They began appealing to the hidden and sometimes not so hidden desires of consumers. Today we are moving toward brands that are distinguished by their values. Customers are beginning to choose based on how these values align with their own values, or at least the values they want to be perceived of having. And this brings us back to that idea of story I mentioned earlier, back from our cave paintings. So remember earlier when I said that you don't have any control, ultimately, of your brand. But while that is true, it doesn't mean that you can't point it in the right direction, and you can't make corrections along the way. So I think we do this by telling the story and thinking of your brand as a story. A good example would be Tom's shoes, and I'm wearing a pair of Tom's. And Diana was here from the White Pine. She sells Tom's in her store, but the story of Tom's is you buy a pair and they give a pair of shoes away to someone in third world country that doesn't have a pair of shoes. So those values align with who I am. So not only does when I buy a pair of Tom's do I feel that Tom's gave away a pair of shoes, but I gave away a pair of shoes. So it makes me feel good. It makes me be a part of that brand. So every one of us is living a story. We all tend to want to be better than we are, and we want to tell a better story with our lives. Oh, and I did that. I touched the scroll bar. If a consumer can see how aligning their story with yours will make their story better, then they're more likely to do so. So how do we do this? And that's what we're going to spend the rest of the morning talking about here. Start by defining who you are, what you do, and why that's important. If you're able to answer those three questions, then you have a good foundation of what your brand can be and where you can, the foundation for your story. Next, do your research. Find out what demographic of people typically aligns with your values. Telling your story to the right people is important. But what's more important is using the right words. The way a story is told is often more important than the story itself. That's why there are great writers, and there are good writers, and there's mediocre writers. Everything about your business plays a role in your story. And I mean everything. Where do you source your materials? How do you dispose of products or of waste products? How are customers greeted when they enter your business, both audibly and visually? Do your employees need uniforms? What's the customer service experience like? What does your product packaging look like? Etc. When all the values and the characters of your story, the little pieces of your brand, are clear, then you need to develop the proper communication vehicles for telling your story. If people don't know that you exist, then they can't shop with you. They can't purchase from you. So these are things like your brand identity, which is more than just a logo. It's colors, it's imagery, it's voice and messaging. There's copywriting involved. Your marketing, your advertising, website, social media, etc. Now, not everyone should use every single option, every single medium. The vehicle you use to communicate is also part of your brand. For example, a company that helps reduce your carbon footprint probably shouldn't send out a printed newsletter. If that makes sense. Finally,
probably not.
it doesn't align with what they're trying to say, what their story is. Finally, you need the tools to allow you to measure your results. If your story isn't resonating with the target audience, then you need to know that and make changes on how it's being told. This doesn't mean you change who you are or what you do, but maybe rethink why it's important, or at least how you're phrasing why it's important. So why should you care about any of this? Because there's a lot of stuff I just said. Well, first off, advertising is really expensive. I don't know if you've advertised, but it costs a lot of money. And you're always wondering, where did my money go? Well, if you get people in your store from this expensive advertising and they don't have a great experience and the brand doesn't measure up with what your advertising is, they won't be back. Worse yet, they may tell their friends about how their experience wasn't what they thought it should be. So we all love these word-of-mouth advertising, referrals. It's the most effective form of advertising there is. But without a well-thought-through brand that delivers a consistent message every time someone comes in contact with it, they'll be less likely to recommend you. And so this happened to my wife and I recently. We really love Messenger Pizza. It's really great. But when they were first getting started, there were some inconsistencies in their pizzas and in the customer service, and my wife recommended the place to 5 different coworkers. It was a lot of people, and they would go down there and they would end up having a really awful experience. We stopped recommending the place. We still go there, we love it, but we won't recommend it anymore because that hurts Messenger, and it's really too bad. But I mean, that's just kind of how it goes. So everything needs to be consistent. You need to have everything thought through. And then having a strong brand that is at the core of having a successful business with sustainable growth. And that means not just one day having 0 customers, the next day having 500. Sustainable growth is slow and it's consistent, and over time people get to know who you are and what you stand for. And a good example, I think, would be the Flying M. Lisa's done a really great job with being consistent. You know, I know what I'm going to get when I come in here. So in summary, your brand is not what you think it is, it's what everyone else thinks it is. Figure out who you are, what you do, and why it's important, and then communicate that to the right people using the right words. And without a consistent brand experience, your customers will have mixed messages and will not feel confident in their experiences nor confident in referring others.